Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a program for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes, or to suggest a particular topic or guest you would like to hear featured on the program. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Global Missions Podcast. Today, we'll be discussing a matter of great importance across many fields, including global missions. We've called it the Millennial Factor. How will we effectively embrace a new, younger generation of workers into our efforts to fulfill the Great Commission? With respect and with optimism, we'll look at some of the characteristics of this millennial generation, most of whom are in their 20s or maybe early 30s. Whether you're a millennial yourself or from some other generation, we hope you'll be encouraged and informed by this discussion with Emma Brewster. Just a quick note here, as we recorded the interview, our team realized that there are many great elements, and we were reluctant to trim the conversation to fit into one single half-hour episode. We chose instead to dedicate 2 episodes to the topic, this episode and the one that will be posted in 2 weeks' time. So before we get to part 1 of this interview, we'd like to share with you this missions resource.
SIM Canada is convinced that no one should live and die without hearing God's good news. We believe that He has called us to make disciples in communities where He is least known. Visit our website at www.sim.ca to see how you can get involved. And now, here's today's interview.
Well, hi again, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Global Missions Podcast. Our guest today is Emma Brewster, who serves as an advisor to SIM International, or Serving in Mission International. She lives in Cape Town, South Africa now, and her title is Ministry Point Person for Engaging Universities Globally. Emma, that is quite a description.
It is, and often I have to pause whenever I hear it.
Sure, yeah. I'm going to ask you about it in just a minute. Emma is passionate about taking the gospel to all parts of the university communities, including students, of course, as well as academics and support staff. Emma, good morning and welcome to the program.
It's wonderful to be with you all.
And I could say good afternoon because in South Africa, where Emma is, it's morning here in Canada and it is afternoon already in Africa. Emma, tell us just a little bit about yourself, please, and your work to engage universities.
I've been involved in engaging universities probably for the last 20 plus years, ever since I was there as a student. With what we're doing within SIM, our greatest desire is really to go where the church is not when you think about the university context, so that we can be taking the gospel to the least reached areas of the university context. So that involves working in lots of different capacities, whether it's in your more traditional kind of student ministry or whether it's in running a coffee shop or teaching English as a second language or placing lecturers in a university where it would actually be very difficult to do anything specifically Christian, but to place a Christian worker within a university context who could be making a difference is enormous.
It's a wonderful vision to include more than just outreach to students, but really leaning into the potential of the whole institution. It's marvelous.
Yeah, it's exciting and at times quite awe-inspiring, but it's important because we long to be thinking about the whole university and research and all of that aspect.
Well, today we want to focus in on the topic. Our topic is engaging millennials, and some of us are concerned and interested and hoping to do an excellent job of welcoming a new generation of workers into global missions. And part of that is understanding our young people who are rising up and taking up important roles in ministry in our organizations, in our churches. So that's our topic this morning with Emma. I wonder if we could start, please, Emma, with just a bit of a description. When we say millennial, Who are we referring to, and what are some of the key characteristics that would define that group?
Well, there are lots of different definitions that people would give, but I think the most popular one would be that it's anybody who was born between 1984 to 2002. So you're predominantly thinking about your kind of 20 age group, but on the outer extremes, it would be kind of 18, 16 maybe through to 32-ish. It's always such a generalized thing when you give characteristics of any age category. But I think a key characteristic is that they're relational, very relational beings. We might want to discuss what that relational aspect looks like. They're a group where technology is their bread and butter, if you like. It's not something learnt, it's something that's just there because it is. And being relational, they're very much a group that want to do things in groups. You know, there's little sense of I want to be on my own. It's actually I want to be involved with others. And then I think one other characteristic that's specifically important for our discussion would be that they want to be involved in something that brings impact, purpose, and significance.
Well, this all rings true, all three characteristics you mentioned. We have two sons in this age group in our family. And I was just talking with my son, Tim, earlier this week about how when we went to the mission field originally, we barely had email. It was just a new technology in those days. And he almost can't imagine that he's not connected. Just in the world of technology, it's natural to them. And highly relational, as you said, and they want to make an impact. I appreciate you making the point, too, that not all people who are born in this time frame, not all millennials are exactly the same. We want to be careful to honor the uniqueness as well and not just create a box or a category. So we do speak in gracious generalities, if I could say it that way.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Do you find this to be a gracious generality around the world, Emma? You work in a lot of different places. Is it consistent around the entire globe?
Yeah, I would say, there are a lot of the generalities that are consistent. What it looks like or how it's expressed might be slightly different. And I think the pressures are slightly different according to their cultural backgrounds. There's a lot that's written on millennials from a Western perspective. And I would love to see some more stuff being written from a non-Western perspective. But I think because we live in a global village, there are lots of similarities that will be there, more so than there would have been in previous generations because of the technology.
So as we're talking about the characteristics of this millennial generation, understanding that we're speaking in generalities, what we've done here is chosen 4 terms that I'm going to launch out, so to speak, for discussion together with Emma with regard to millennials. So Emma, the first one we chose here is finances. Talk to us just a little bit about how millennials generally think about finance.
I think it's always their first question because finances plays a big role in their lives in terms of having often a huge amount of debt that will have come from university or college, and just how are they going to survive? We're living in a more expensive world as well. And so I think we need to be thinking of creative solutions so that finances doesn't become a stumbling block to cross-cultural ministry, but actually is something that can be embraced and together overcome.
Okay, that's good. Training.
Yeah, training is one. I think often we can feel as if millennials have got all the answers, and they might come across as that being the case, but actually they're hungry for training. They really want to be invested in. They want to be given opportunities for professional development, which I think is an area that often we miss, perhaps, when it comes to cross-cultural ministry. And being equipped for all the different aspects that they're going to be going into. And it may well be that there are particular areas that they want to grow in and develop in. A millennial is training for life. It's not like going to mission college and then you're out on the field. But for them, they want to be learning and growing and training for life. But that training is not in the classroom training necessarily. It's not book training of just reading this, that, and the other, but it's actually training through experience, training through mistakes, training through actually doing, and then being able to talk about it.
So you're saying that they don't actually know it all? Absolutely,
yeah. I think anyway. They would, and yet they want to. They want to know it all. And so that's a real positive, I think. They're hungry to grow and develop.
That's good. The third term is inclusivism.
Yeah, they're a generation that wants to include everybody and doesn't want anybody to feel excluded or undervalued. And so I think it's really important to think through what does that look like to have a diverse community, a diverse group that is valuing everybody equally and giving everybody equal opportunities to grow and develop in their areas.
So that includes ethnicity, gender, generation. It's a broad statement, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is. In fact, they're totally multicultural, the whole, different types.
Yeah, and in our global world and in our multicultural teaming to do mission work, they also bring an openness and a capacity for that as well. Okay, this last term we wrestled with a bit, oxymoron. We wanted to get this idea of tension or contradiction as related to millennials. Talk a little bit about oxymoron.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of contradictions when it comes to millennials. They want this independence, but they also need support. They want to be individual, and yet they hugely value working as a team. They want instant gratification, and as a result can sometimes give up at the first hurdle, but they need help to walk through that because actually they're wanting security into the long term. And I think there are many more of them. Those are just kind of a few of them. And then they're really hungry for a life balance where perhaps one of the weaknesses in the past could be a work ethic of it's all about the task and the work and the doing. For millennials, life balance is really important, and they want to do excellently in their work, but also excellently in their family life and in their friendships. And holding those can be a tension for them.
Well, I just would like to add here at this point, especially for our listeners who may be millennials, I'm cautious of talking about a group of people from the outside here, and I hope that you understand that we want to speak with grace. We want you to come into ministry with us. We want you to be part of our agencies and our churches. If any of this conversation sounds too much outside, we're just talking about you, please be patient with that while we try and learn, and it's meant in the most gracious and optimistic way.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm sure there are many more things that any millennial who's listening would want to add and contribute towards this conversation.
Now, it happens on our podcast team that Rebecca, our producer, is actually herself a millennial, right, Rebecca?
Yes, I am.
And it's true that you're a millennial who was raised as an MK, missionary kid. You grew up where?
In the Congo.
Let me ask this. Even though you grew up in not in a Western world, you're a millennial, did you feel that what we're talking about here, do you feel that what we're talking about here is on track? Are we near the mark here?
Yeah, I think it's just helpful to give voice to some of those characteristics. A lot of them are positive or, on the spectrum of they could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But just to be able to even better understand how we view the world, I think is helpful for millennials, but also for the other generations working with us.
I sure hope we can get through the us and them mentality. You know, sometimes we are talking in these terms, but
Yeah.
we are very glad to have Rebecca on our team and the excellent contributions. And there are many more millennials making great contributions in mission work for sure.
Yeah.
Well, as Christ followers, we are called to be disciple makers, regardless of which generation we are born into. Emma, are there particular aspects of cross-cultural ministry and of disciple making that you see appealing to the millennial generation?
Building on what I said before, I think being relational is really important, and a desire to be in a team. I think there's a lot when it comes to cross-cultural ministry of wanting to do things together. And so they don't want to do it alone or go alone, but to be able to go with a group of friends, to be able to go where they're in relationship is important. I think what they do in doing cross-cultural ministry, they need to know the why. They're not just going to do it because it's something that needs to be done. It comes back to that whole thing of impact, purpose, and significance, which I think is probably why they're often more drawn to compassion ministries and advocacy and justice and reconciliation, those kind of cross-cultural aspects of ministry.
And so those are going to complement what's already going on already in discipleship ministries. I guess one of the things I'd like to bring out, and I feel this, is an optimism for millennials. Sometimes I feel a concern or even a reluctance on the part of some ministries or agencies because it seems difficult to understand, or these young people are different than we are. These things you're describing complement, relational ministry. We want to do that. We want to take the gospel through relationship to unreached peoples.
I think, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me is I think there are a lot of common characteristics that are valued both with millennials and those that have gone before them, but it's just the how is what is different. So the kind of support that they need is different. How they might go about building those relationships is different. Obviously, their kind of passion for being involved in technology and having technology as part of who they are, that just naturally comes into the way that they are doing relationship building and cross-cultural building, which for the previous generations may well be a foreign concept, or they might not actually see that as being relational because it's not face-to-face. So I think that's where some of the conflicts can sometimes come.
I see. Well, let's go to that a bit. Are there aspects of how agencies or churches are working today that really create friction with millennials? And I realize we're talking about in these gracious generalities. Are there things that we're doing that is unappealing or that they struggle with? And what are some of those things?
I think sometimes, particularly for mission agencies and for them getting involved in doing cross-cultural mission, there's a sense of boxes that we have to tick, and whether it's particularly on what work they're going to be doing, or whether it's in terms of skill sets that we're looking for. Sometimes I think we can be within our boxes and we want to know, can they do this? Will they do that? Whereas for them, it's broader than that. They're thinking in lots of different areas and they think outside the box. And so therefore, they're wanting to be creative and bring in all of their ideas to the floor, which sometimes I think we can be threatened by. And that's not their intention at all.
So you talk about boxes, that we have checklists. Do you sense that millennials wince when they see a checklist? We need to accomplish this, and here are the 8 or 10 points we need to cover.
Yeah, I think they do wince with that. I think, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody just earlier who kind of said they want to be part of the brainstorming process. They don't want to be seen as, I don't even know how to describe it, almost like an object rather than as an individual. They want to be treated individually, and yet they want to be able to bring all of their ideas through and have a conversation and a dialogue rather than being task orientated and task driven.
Very interesting. We may need to be more patient than some of our agenda driven initiatives. And finding the balance there is going to be a gracious one. Again, to use that word, we still want to get things done, and perhaps some of us are more driven by lists or something like that, but to welcome their potential in, we need to reconsider how we go about it.
Sometimes we need to be patient in listening to all of their ideas, because often they just want to brainstorm and they'll come out with loads of ideas, loads of passion, loads of enthusiasm, of which some of them might be unrealistic. Mm-hmm. But actually, as you begin to explore and unpack, it then becomes clearer which ones are the ones to really run with. And it becomes clearer for them because they'll speak it out.
Well, that's going to be healthy, too, to separate ideation or the creative moments, the creative times from actual advocacy or decision, right?
Yep.
That's going to be a healthy differentiation, but to be patient with the listening. I remember an occasion when I was in a group of CEOs for mission agencies meeting together, all leaders, senior leaders in organizations, and it was deemed wise to have some millennials come and to participate in that meeting to share a few ideas about millennials, actually. And one of the young women who was there made a great presentation, and she said, really, she's speaking to the senior leaders of these organizations. She said, we want a seat at the table. We want to help influence how this organization is moving. And
absolutely,
it created a bit of space, actually, and it was a bit jarring for the leaders because some of them thought, now just wait a minute, young lady. We have done our time in this organization, and we have been at this for a long time, and you're coming in. And I watched the tension and the separation. I'll confess, I felt some of it myself too, but realizing there wasn't any ill intent in that. It wasn't an arrogance. It was a desire to participate. And we just need to watch. And I hope being aware of some of those things can cause us to pause and be a little more patient in the listening mode.
Yeah. And I think we need to be asking questions about that in every area in terms of in our leadership. Who in our leadership have we got that's under the age of 30? Who have we got under the age of 30 on our boards? What does that look like? And to embrace it rather than be worried about it, because actually I think we'll be surprised at the wisdom and input that's given from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just ask before we move on to positive steps, are there any more concerns that you would raise, friction points that you think are worthy of noting here?
I think, there are various different struggles that I think millennials have with, which links in with what you're saying, and I think is why they're wanting to be at the table, is opposition to change and to organizations or ideas of how to do ministry being traditional, and that their creative ideas are kind of stunted, if you like, which I think can cause them to quickly drop out of that ministry because their creativity has been stunted. I think another area is the role of short-term versus long-term, and how non-millennials can sometimes view short-term as being non-committal, and you're really properly in ministry if you're going to invest in it for the long term. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of mission agencies at the moment, particularly that are just struggling with the the old concept of you go into cross-cultural ministry and you stay in that one place for however many years. But as far as a millennial is concerned, I only want to think as far as 6 months down the road, and even that might be too long. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I might not do cross-cultural ministry for 6 months and then absolutely love that and end up staying there for the next 6 years. It might mean that I shift on to something else a year down the road, but that's not a lack of commitment. That's just the way that millennials function. And I think all over the world, in businesses everywhere, people are having to react to that, adjust to that.
Well, there's no question that the rising of this younger generation is causing waves, let's say, not only in the ministry world, but in the church world, in the business world as well. This is a stirring thing.
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many things that could be added. Finances is a big thing. Often if you're going off to be involved in mission, you've got to raise this amount of money, or you've got to be able to be at this point in order for you to be able to go. But I think for many, the actual debt that many millennials are carrying currently, and that can inhibit them to our idea of you need to have this amount in order to go, or of the idea of you just need to go and then the Lord will provide. I think in the age-old days of initial, when the missionaries were heading off, that was how it was, and you took your coffin with you. Well, we're a long way from that now.
Right.
And it's how do we adapt to that?
Well, this is like you said, just scratching the surface of a lot of these concepts, but it's helpful just to get a sketch, and I hope that for our audience, it'll be encouraging to think through some of these things. We hope that this episode has stirred your thinking and maybe your heart on this important topic. And we're not finished. As I mentioned in the introduction, we have formed this interview into 2 episodes, so if you'll join us again next time, you'll hear the conclusion of the interview with Emma. Remember, you can find the show notes on our website at globalmissionspodcast.com. That's all for today. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Centre for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of our team, thanks for listening. Join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue the conversation with Emma Brewster on the Millennial Factor and continue to explore the grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.